Well, good morning again. As we get started with the message this morning, I want to say thank you so much for your continued prayers for my back. It's much better than it was last week. As I mentioned to Nicole this morning, much less drama in our house this morning than there was last week. So really appreciate those, and as we keep healing up on that. One quick announcement I want to give to you guys this morning too. Hopefully you saw the email this past week that came out on Monday. The elders last week, after Matthew McConnell was here, offered him the position of the associate pastor of youth role, and Matthew accepted. And so, yeah, we're excited about that. And he actually will be here Sunday, like one more week, and starting out on Monday of next week. So really quick, but housing has come together for him in a really good way. He's excited to be here, to say the least, and we're excited to have him. So next week when he's here, definitely make sure you give him a nice warm welcome, and as he starts to, get used to Bloomington and this area, if you think about it, invite him over for dinner, He's a single guy. I don't know how much ramen he might eat. So invite him over for dinner, have him over, and get to know him as well. I was thinking about this message a little bit this week, and, things just sometimes get better over time, don't they? For instance, the first thing that popped into my head was vehicles. My dad bought his first, the first car I remember him buying. He bought some before me, obviously, but he bought a 1987 Chevrolet Cavalier, okay? Two-door. This thing had the tape deck in it, and it came with the free tape from Chevrolet. I'm sure second service there'll be more people who will not understand what I'm talking about. But for you young guys in here, back in the day, you used to get a free tape with a $12,000 vehicle. Oh, it was a great tape too, usually. And the cool thing was about this car is it had, I guess I should say what it didn't have. No power steering, okay? So they used to make cars without power steering. For you who don't know what that is, it's a pump, a hydraulic pump pretty much in your car that makes turning the wheel much easier when you're driving. It did not have air conditioning, okay? I guess it did too at 55, right? Like both windows down. And then it did not have, and this is the killer right here. It did not have automatic windows. You had to crank them, right? Manual windows. And if you wanted to open up the passenger side, you could get out of the car and walk over and open the door and roll it down that way. Or you could lay all the way across the car and try to do it, right? And but as things get better, my guess is most of us have vehicles today that have automatic windows in them. And the one thing that we discovered when we were in Austria, and they have them here too, but we never had a car with it, were heated steering wheels. Like, is there anything much better than a heated steering wheel? There's one thing better than a heated steering wheel. Heated and cooled seats. Yeah, I don't know what it is about those cooled seats, but man, when you're in August in wherever, Florida, Indiana, it doesn't matter. Cooled seats are nice. But you can see things have gotten a little better with vehicles over time, haven't they? It's nice not to feel like you're going to strain muscles turning the wheel of a car or whatever it might be. And, when we think about this and we come into this verse that we're going to read today, Jesus did the same thing. He took things that were important in the Jewish religion and he completed them. He took them to the next level of wholeness. And we're going to look at that today. Our big idea for this morning is this. Even though the Sabbath is not required today, there are parts of it that help us become more like Christ. So let's look at our verse. Again, we're in the book of Mark. Right now, we're going to stick with Mark until Easter, and then we'll move into something else after that. But today, we're in Mark chapter 2 still, verses 23 through 28. So we're going to read those right now. It says, on Sabbath, he was going through the grain fields, he being Jesus and his disciples there. And as they made their way, his disciples began to pluck heads of grain. And the Pharisees were saying to him, look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath? And he said to them, have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry? He and those who were with him, how they entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. You know, you look at this, and it seems like a lot of stuff we looked at in chapter 2 has the Pharisees attacking Jesus. And so the first question in my head came, why? Why do they keep attacking Jesus? And I think it was because the way he was following God was not the way the Pharisees thought you should follow God. It wasn't how the Pharisees thought they should follow God. And we talked a little bit about that last week with fasting, where they put these rules and regulations that were never intended for what it became. And the really cool thing here, too, is that as Jesus is going through these, he knows their thoughts, doesn't he? He knows what they're thinking. He knew their minds. He knew why they were saying what they're saying. The cool thing is, too, and I don't know if this scares you or not, maybe a little bit it should, Jesus knows our thoughts as well, doesn't he? He knows our thoughts as well. Did you know during the Greek and Roman times, when a drama was performed, that there were no female actors? There were female roles, but no female actors. And so men would dress and put a mask on to portray themselves as a female. And they would wear these costumes, and that mask hid who they really were, and it portrayed something else. And unfortunately, we do that sometimes too, don't we? We put a mask on and we portray something that we're not. You know, we hide who we really are. We walk into the doors of the church and we put on our mask that when we come in and we talk to people and everybody goes, well, how you doing? Oh, I'm great. Doing wonderful. And the reality is, deep down inside, you're not doing wonderful. Or maybe you're not living the life that God calls you to live. You see, as a family of God, our difficulties are not our own. Do you understand what I'm saying there? Like, your suffering does not belong to you. Your suffering belongs to the whole congregation. What you're going through, whether it be sin, whether it be issues in your life, difficulties, whatever it might be, those things do not belong just to you. They belong to everybody in this room as a family. What does it look like if when we come into the church, we try to be real with each other? How are you doing? You know, I'm not good. I'm not good. I'm struggling. And I'm not saying get up on stage and tell everybody your biggest sin. I'm saying maybe there are people in this room that you need to share that with so you can connect with them and they can walk with you in that way. Maybe that's what it is. Because it's real easy for us to walk in and try to hide the things that we truly are, but that's not what God wants. He wants us to act like a family, to work together as a family, and know that those things, that suffering, it doesn't belong to just you. It's so much easier to go through things together, isn't it? If I would have lifted a box with a chair in it with somebody else like I was supposed to, it would have been a lot easier. What does it mean if we go through life walking with people, caring about each other? It'd probably be a little easier, wouldn't it? To have those individuals to go over things and to bounce things off of. And this is what it means to be a whole person. This is what it means to be a whole person, sharing our difficulties, our struggles, and our sin. And you know, when you think about that, I think part of the reason why we struggle with this is because we're so afraid to walk in and somebody's going to judge us for what we're doing or who we are or what we're going through. The reality is, somebody in this room has already gone through what you're going through. When we talk about this suffering not belonging just to you, it's not just about helping you walk through it and going through it. It's also about you helping other people go through what you've already gone through. That's what it's about as well. It's about each other sharing those things, not being judgmental about each other, but being merciful with each other. Maybe instead of when somebody says, I'm struggling with sin, and here's the sin, maybe it's a place of love and mercy, not a place of judgment going, well, wow, how can you be that way? How can you do that? And maybe it becomes, man, how can I help you? How can I walk through you this? Because when we show mercy to each other, that's when we truly, truly show each other who Jesus is. So let's look farther and deeper into this verse. The disciples are walking through this field, and they're just reaching down and popping the heads off the grain and just popping them open and eating them as they walk through. And the Pharisees see this, and they attack Jesus. And they say, why are you doing this? Why are you allowing your disciples to work on the Sabbath? Why are you allowing them to do things that you're not supposed to do, right? And so Jesus shares this story, and you can go back and read the story on your own. It's actually from 1 Samuel chapter 21. And Jesus shares this story of David when they were out, they were hungry, and they went into the house of the Lord and took this bread of presence. Now, this bread of presence was a sacrificial gift that was given that was then given to the priest to consume. In the Old Testament, when things like sacrifices would happen or different things like that, that meat or the bread or whatever it might have been was then given to the priest to consume as their food. Okay? So it wasn't like a sacrifice. We see a lot about sacrificial animal sacrifice in the Old Testament with cows and different things like that. And it wasn't just like this entire, animal of 500, 600 pounds or whatever it might have been was just thrown to the side and given away and just left out. No, that meat was taken and it would feed the priest. It would feed the people who worked in the temple with the priest or whoever that might have been. And so when we see this verse that David comes in, and it was not lawful for David to eat of those things or to do those things. But yet he comes in and he does that, and the priest gives it to him because they were hungry. And at that moment, the health of that person, the health of them, or what they were going through was more important than the laws that were given at that time. And so David takes this, and Jesus uses this example because Jesus knows that the Pharisees would have known this story. They would have known this story. And Jesus does this cool thing here where he goes in and he goes, the Sabbath was not made, or man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. And this is that kind of interesting thing that sometimes happens, right? Sometimes we take things and we get the order a little messed up, don't we? We get the order a little messed up. And so Jesus is showing this. I did a quick search in Google. Again, a beautiful thing Google is. I'm not Jewish. Never been one in my life. Don't know much about other than what I've read in the Old Testament. And so I was like, okay, I need to find out more about what the Sabbath means to the Jewish people, right? And so I found that there are different sects in the Jewish religion, and some are much more stringent than others, right? It would be similar to our denominations in the church today, right? Like you have different denominations that have different beliefs, and some I think we can get on board with or at least accept, and others that we feel like are maybe going very much down the wrong path. The same thing was in the Jewish religion. It still is today. Because I found a website which was actually a Jewish temple that had a list of 39 things you cannot do on the Sabbath. Okay? Sabbath for the Jewish people starts Friday night at sundown. So in the winter, the Sabbath lasts longer. Friday at sundown to Saturday at sundown. That's how long it lasts. 39 things. Oh, it gets more fun than that. You get through those 39 things, and then there are things in those 39 things to clarify what those are. For instance, I just have a few here. Burning anything. Can't burn anything. Okay? Can't light a match. Right? You can't burn wood. So if you need to warm your home with wood, you have to have it going before the Sabbath starts. You can't light a candle. Okay? So you got to light a candle before Sabbath starts, and I guess hope that candle lasts the whole time if you need the light. How many of you drove to church this morning? Yeah? I figured as most of us did here today. Probably not too many people walking out there right now. Starting a car is causing combustion to happen, which is in this category. Can't start a car. So we've all broke the Sabbath today on that. You can't extinguish a fire, okay? Unless risk of life is at hand, right? So if a barn catches on fire and there's nobody that's life is going to be risked, you can't put it out. But if, it was your house, obviously you could put that out, but you can't extinguish a fire. You can't finish anything, all right? And this would be like if you're working on your house, you're putting up, the baseboard or something like that, finishing like that. Finishing here also includes tearing paper. And some of you went there, and I'm going to go there too. Are you ready? That means you can't tear toilet paper. Yeah. So, you got to lay the sheets out before Sabbath starts, okay? And ration it, all right? You can't write. Includes typing on a computer, writing with a pencil. You can't even carry a pencil. That is against the Sabbath. I mean, it's no cooking, okay? So all your food, you can heat food up, but you can't cook it. So it's already got to be pre-cooked. You can't wash things. That'd be like even if you spill something, you wipe it up with a cloth and you go to wring it out. You can't do that. Knotting, you cannot tie knots on the Sabbath unless it's a bow. You can tie bows, like your shoe. You tie a bow in your shoe. You can do that, but not knotting. You can't reap anything, like reaping a crop, which is what the disciples were doing, okay? That's why the Pharisees freaked out on them, because they were like, no, you're reaping. You can't do that. Separating. So, for instance, let's say you go home today and you grab the tub of blueberries out of the fridge, and you're like, yeah, I'm going to snack on these. Oh, look, there's some kind of half-rotten ones. You can't throw those out because that's separating. If you do it, you have to take out just as many good ones so you don't break the Sabbath on that. And then the last one I'll share with you is you can't dye anything, like, make the color difference on it, right? Ladies, this includes makeup. You can't put lipstick on the Sabbath. You can't put eyeliner on the Sabbath. So all you women, you know who you are. You broke the Sabbath today, okay? All right? It's just crazy the number of rules that happen, and these rules become how they judge whether they're doing the right thing or not. But Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, and he does this really cool thing in the scripture where he uses David, but then is a fulfillment of what David did. David was taking care of the people who were with him to feed them. Jesus was letting his disciples pop the heads of grain off and eat it to take care of them. Jesus was a fulfillment of what David was. A completeness of what David was. And the Bible does this a lot. When you look at Adam and Jesus, Jesus is often compared to Adam as like the fulfillment of what God intended. Or the Passover, right? Like in our class Wednesday night, we talked quite a bit about the Passover. And the Passover, this piece of that, it's Jesus is the unblemished lamb that the Hebrew people would use in the Passover. Jesus is the fulfillment of the being the perfect lamb to take that sin away. And so we see that, and then we also see it a lot with David and Jesus. This fulfillment, where Jesus is taking the incomplete of what this was. This, it's obvious, we know David sinned. So Jesus is taking this incomplete piece and making it complete. And he does the same for us today. He takes who we are, our incompleteness, and makes us complete. Makes us complete. Makes us what he intended us to be. So I think it's appropriate for us to talk about how we respond to this idea of Sabbath today, right? So how do we respond to Sabbath today? Well, no secret, it was in the big idea. We are not required to keep the Sabbath. It's not anywhere in the New Testament that we should keep the Sabbath. It's never been a command. We do not have to keep the Sabbath. So, when I was growing up, I think I've shared some stuff about this before. I don't think it was intended in my raising in the church, but legalism really crept into my life in a pretty rough way. And to where, I would look at things and I would be like, well, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. And it wasn't because it was what God desired. It was because I felt like there were rules that I had to follow to make sure I was a good Christian. To where, even with the idea of going to lunch on a Sunday after church, I don't remember who this person was, but they even said, well, when you go to church, or when you go to dinner after church and you go out to a restaurant and you eat, you are probably causing that person to sin because they are working on the Sabbath. And in my head it went, oh my goodness, I can't be doing that. I cannot be doing those things. But the reality is, the Sabbath is not something that's commanded for us as Christians. It's not a command for us. We're not required to keep it today. However, I do think there are pieces of it, or elements of it, or the intended purpose of it that I think are really good for us today. And I want to look at those things together with you. First of all, when we think of Sabbath, we should think of rest and rejuvenation. Look, we need to rest, all right? If you're that person that's like, I got to work 7 days a week. Maybe you do. I can't tell you can't or can't. I'm not going to judge you in that way. But you have to have rest. And sometimes our body even gets to the point where it's like, nope, you will rest now. Because I'm going to let you get sick, so you have to rest. We need to rest and we need to rejuvenate. We need to allow ourselves. That's why we sleep at night. That's why we do those things to rest and rejuvenate. And with God, it's important on a Sabbath to rest. God did it. He did it. He created a world and then took a day off. And we need to do the same. We need to take time to rest and rejuvenate. Because when we do that, it leads to other things. For instance, this next piece. It leads us to connect with God. When we slow down and truly focus in on connecting with God, it's a beautiful thing. I want you to be clear on this. This doesn't necessarily mean that you go home and you sit down and you open up your Bible and you just read for hours, okay? There are a lot of different ways to connect with God. A lot of different ways to connect to God. Maybe walking in the woods is a way for you to connect with God. Do it. Maybe, sitting on your back porch with a cup of coffee and listening to the birds is a way for you to connect with God. Do it. There are a lot of different ways we can do this. And a lot of times it's unique to you. Where maybe for me, walking in the woods is not great. I do enjoy that. I'm just using it as an example. For you it is. For me, maybe it's not. Maybe the reading is more important to me. But, don't let those things dissipate either. We should be doing things sometimes that we don't necessarily connect with 100% because that allows us to connect with God in a different way too. So with the Sabbath, this idea of Sabbath, we need to be connecting with God in that way. Another way is fellowship. Fellowship. Guys, this connection with our church family is so important. It is so important. God did not create us to go through life alone. He created us to go through with each other. And we have an incredible church here. We have a beautiful church here, a beautiful family. And we need to make sure we're connecting with each other. And that can be on Sunday morning right now. That could be on Wednesday. It could be in a small group, whatever it might be. We need to make sure that we're connecting with each other. And then also, we need to make sure that we're taking time for reflection. What is God doing in my life? What is he teaching me? What is he asking of me? Where is he pushing me in directions? To take time of reflection. And I don't know if you can tell, but this is not something that just has to happen on Sunday mornings. This should be something that we're trying to do daily with God. To take a Sabbath with God every day. And that could look different. That could be going to the gym after work and running as hard as you can on a treadmill. That's something I'm not going to do, just so you know. All right? Running as hard as you can on a treadmill and praying while you do it. All right? Or listening to worship music and worshiping God through those moments. Like, that could be that moment for you. But we need to be doing these things, honestly, every day. But I also think there is an element of this that happens on Sunday mornings that's important. Very important. And I think this is part of why our meeting together weekly is so important. Hebrews 10:24 and 25 says this. It says, "And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." I want to walk into this idea very carefully, okay? Because this is something that I know, I'm not coming at you, I'm kind of stepping with you on this, if that makes sense. I think we got to be careful what we allow to take this time away on Sunday mornings. We really need to be careful what we prioritize over this moment. And I know that's not easy. We had kids in sports, and I remember a few different times having to try to figure out how that looks. But I just want to say it this way, and please know my heart. I'm not coming down on you. I told Nicole last night I was really struggling with saying this, but I feel like it needs to be said. We need to ask ourselves that when we do or don't make this a priority, what we're teaching people around us. What are we teaching our kids, our grandkids, the people that we're interacting with? And I'm not saying, look, this is not me trying to put guilt on you or anything like that, okay? What this is like, it needs to be something to think about. Because it is something that, in 21 years of youth ministry, I've seen kids walk away from the church because priorities were not set the way they should be. And I just, it's difficult, right? I get that. It's not easy. I understand that. And so I'm not saying that in a way to go, well, how dare you? I'm saying, I understand. We just got to figure it out. We got to understand and really, I think, make this a priority. Because I think sometimes when we move in that direction, maybe other things will start seeing that should be a priority as well again. So with that in mind, let's go back to our big idea for today. Even though the Sabbath is not required today, there are parts of it that help us become more like Christ. And I want to say this again. Jesus took the incomplete and he made it complete. Look, the Pharisees made all these rules. The Pharisees were like, nope, you can't do this, you can't do this. Well, what if I do this? Nope, yes, you can, not. The Pharisees made all these rules, but then Jesus comes along and he redirects us into what God desired. You see, God doesn't desire us to follow rules. He desires a relationship with you. He desires a relationship with you. You see, back in the garden, what the serpent did was he took the relationship of God and made it into a rule by, well, you can't eat of that tree. Surely that's not what God means. And it removed the relationship that God wants with us. And it made it about following rules. And Jesus takes that incompleteness of the relationship with God and makes it complete. He brings us back to that relationship with God because that's what we're made for. And when we think about the Sabbath is there to bring that relationship in full circle, to bring it connected to God, not to follow rules. And maybe this morning, you're in a place where, you know what, like you just want that relationship with God as well. Maybe God is saying, hey, this is the time for you to come to me as your Savior, to start this relationship. If that's you this morning, I just pray that you'll come down front, talk with me. We would love to talk more. Maybe you're ready to be baptized. We would love to do that. Whatever that looks like, I ask you to make that decision this morning. Maybe you just need prayer. That's what we're here for too, as a family, to connect with each other. Remember, that suffering is not your own. We're here for you. Or maybe you've been with us for a while and you know what? Smithville Christian Church is where I want my church home to be. And you're ready to put your membership in here. Come forward and do that this morning as well. If you have a decision to make, we just pray as we stand and sing. You'll make that. Why don't you stand with us?